Alrighty, do you got a notification that says Youri's recording the call?
Yeah, I do see that.
Okay, perfect. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of 1+1, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. And it's nearly the end of the year, which means this is possibly our final episode of the season. I say possibly because there still are one or two more episodes I might be doing. But if not, this is going to be one of our final episodes of the seasons. And I'm rejoined by past guest and returning champion Aidan Jonah, the founder and editor-in-chief of the Canada Files, one of the few radically anti-imperialist news sites devoted to holding Canadian imperialism into account. So, firstly, Aidan, thanks so much for taking the time to come back on yet another All Things Canada edition.
Yeah, for sure, Youri. I'm glad to be back on here.
Yes, it's been too long, and just before we get into some of the topics we want to talk about, like I said, it's nearly the end. It's nearly the end of the year for 1+1, but it's also nearly the end of the year for the Canada Files, and I believe I believe there are three things happening. You guys are doing your end of the year fundraising drive. Talk to us about that. Talk to us about a big event that you're that you're going to be co-hosting, co-organizing with a very popular left-wing anti-war, anti-imperialist magazine called Covert Magazine. I believe that's what they're called. And anything else, anything else to plug? Please, the floor is yours before we get into some of these specific topics.
Sure thing, Youri. Thanks. For people who aren't familiar with the Canada Files, we are a socialist, anti-imperialist news outlet focusing on Canadian foreign policy, really investigations and hard-hitting news analysis. So we've been around since November 2019. So we've been around for more than 3 years. We have a track record. We have a precedent of a lot of critical reporting and a lot of critical investigations. So in terms of the fundraising campaign, we launched that on the 6th of November with a nice launch video that we pulled together with some of the endorsements that we have. There's more to be released, of course. And in terms of what we're looking for, we're really trying to bring ourselves up to $4,000 Canadian a month in support. We started this campaign around $700. We're already up to about $1,041. So we are growing at a decent pace in terms of the fundraising, the funding. Certainly, we're hoping to see a bit of a spike in the next week or so. I think we have some big stuff planned. But certainly, in terms of like what we're going to bring to the table with some more support, more investigations, we've started to do interviews actually through this special new speaker series. First person we had was Ava Bartlett, who does some really critical journalism especially on foreign policy.
Yes, and she's been on the program before to talk
Donbass, Palestine, Syria. So we had her on as the first guest. We've had some great articles come along this week, and yeah, certainly, it's just in terms of like what we're going to be bringing. Like I said, more interviews, and just generally, in terms of the organizational structure, we're worked really hard to build that. We're a firm news organization, right? We will be making our name, and we'll be bringing you guys some really key investigations and some really key analysis. That's what we're going to focus on. There's a lot of great activist groups out there, but there's not really any really firm, socialist and imperialist news organizations, right? That specialize in that focus, that specialize in investigations, and so especially in Canada, that's really unique. And so that's what I'd say we bring to the table. And we're looking for some small monthly donations each month to help us grow and do more of our journalism. So.
And talk to us about this event that you're organizing with Covert Magazine, which is a really great, very much like consortium news. It focuses a lot on the national security state, anti-imperialism, anti-war issues. Talk to us about this event that you're going to be doing with them.
Sure thing. So it's going to be December 13th, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time is going to be starting. So this event's title is The Secret U.S. Invasion of Canada, How the CIA Manipulates Public Opinion and Corrupts Canadian Foreign Policy. So really, this is an all-personal event since I've been really spearheading the way of covering how the CIA influences Canadian politics. It all started when I exposed how a Canadian Parliament subcommittee was really being drastically influenced by this NED, and that is, of course, National Endowment for Democracy, which is a CIA fund, and that's where the CIA influence comes in. That group drove it. And then as I went along more and more, I discovered some adjacency, and then I discovered more groups being directly funded. And it's a really dangerous thing. So, besides Covert Action Magazine, ourselves, we've slowly built some contacts over the summer, and we eventually came together, decided we wanted to do an event, and this was the product. So, also, by the way, of course, later on, we've had a Fire This Time, Movement for Social Justice. They've actually, they're going to be helping us with the video, some technical elements. So want to give them a shout out, of course. Thank you to those folks, great folks to work with. And in terms of the guests that you'll be getting to see, there's going to be, of course, Ava Bartlett, as I already mentioned before in the show. You have Arnold August, who's the contributing editor for the Canada Files. You have Jeremy Kuzmarov, who's the managing editor for Covert Action Magazine. And you got myself, of course, the editor-in-chief of the Canada File. So it's going to be a really rockin' event.
A super panel, so yeah.
For sure, and people can definitely go to the Canada Files site, just go click on Home, and then you'll find an article with the title, The Canada Files and Covert Action Magazine Announce Event, and you'll click on that and you can find the link in there. I definitely recommend people give that a go, and you will see a really terrific event on the 13th, 7 p.m.
And then before we get to specific articles, one more thing we do have to plug is the Canada Files has what's called an advisory board or an advisory editorial board. Who is on that? Because those are also some great people that I would love to plug for you guys.
Sure thing. So we got a couple great people. You got William Gingwei Dare, who's been a really long time contributor to the Canada Files. You've seen his terrific articles in China. He was also one of the people who reached out to me and wanted to write about the case of Laith Marouf, of course, in the summer, basically, which I was quite happy to have him write about. You got Kit Clarenberg, who heads up the British division for the Grey Zone. He's done really great work for a long, long time. Terrific investigative journalist, just incredibly high standards. The guy is great to have on the board. You got Joe Emmersberger, really strong on Latin America, generally on the politics side of foreign policy. Just a very good, very smart person to have. He's done a lot of good work on Venezuela, for example, particularly. I know he's written for FAIR a decent bit. You got Jenny Laurier-Sully, who's part of, I believe Solidarité Quebec Haiti. Very good, focused on Haiti, very smart person, really reliable, and a good person to have on the board, especially talking about issues of Haiti, Caribbean, just a great person to have. Of course, you got Arnold August, contributing editor. Plays the role he plays. He does a good job in these things, and he's a valuable figure.
Exactly, leading Cuba's solidarity voice as well. And he's been
for sure. The stuff he's done on Cuba for the Canada Files has been nothing short of terrific. It really has been. You got Junaid Khan, who was actually a foreign correspondent for La Presse for 36 years. He actually covered the first Intifada, if you could believe it.
Okay.
Yeah, very, very smart person, born in Mauritius, and he came to Canada in the mid to late 60s. So really smart guy, really reliable, and, great to work with journalistically. He's got decades of experience, just a very cool head. Good guy to have. And you got Dan Kovalik, who is he teaches at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law, really teaches international human rights. He's really a great lawyer. I know he spoke to the UN. It was one of the UN boards or UN panels. I can't remember the specific one, but he did speak there recently. So really high quality guy. He's written 7 books. Just a good person to have. And that is the extent of the advice.
Starting recording.
Oh, yep. We're back on.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that, folks. Welcome back to 1+1. I'm here talking with Aidan Jonah, the editor-in-chief of the Canada Files. And yeah, we're here to talk about all things Canada, and also, folks, and also to plug the Canada Files End of the Year fundraising drive, which people should donate generously to. Okay, so that's the wonderful advisory board, and love Dan Kovalik. I actually have his book about the plots called "The Plots of Scapegoats Russia," and definitely have to have open invite to any of those folks to come on this program, especially open invite to all those.
Most definitely, I'm sure they'd be happy to come along if they have some time.
Definitely. And just before we and again, one last thing before we get to the specific questions, I have to say this about the Canada Files. I've jokingly called the Canada Files when William Deere was on the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour with my friend Eve Angler. I was saying to William Deere, before I asked him a question about Taiwan. I said to him, that you guys are the Canophiles. You, Arnold August and Daniel G and Aidan Jonah. You guys are like the bad boys of like anti-imperialism. So she thought that was very amusing because indeed, while some of even the best left-leaning and left-leaning news outlets, left-wing organizations, which are great on many topics, a lot of people's coverage on Iran, I find has been very problematic, but the Canophiles isn't doing that. While so many left-leaning outlets are playing footsie with the new Cold War on China, or still to an extent playing footsie with NATO, the Canophiles firmly says no, 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 and no. And here are some facts for you guys to digest. And so you guys are again consistently anti-imperialist, anti-war, but sometimes that does ruffle a lot of feathers, Aidan. So I jokingly call you.
If you're serious about the principles, you gotta be aware you're gonna piss some people off. It's
exactly that's why I jokingly call you guys the bad boys of anti-imperialism. Okay, on to the topics at hand. Aidan, there's a lot of stuff to talk about. So let's try to get underway. Let's try to get this to an hour. So the first article I wanted to talk to you about. This is the headline: Canadian rights group demands sanctions on Cuba, calls for regime change. Talk to us briefly, if you can, about this article, which was one that you personally were investigating.
Sure thing. So, obviously the anti-Cuba forces have been getting bolder in these last year or two. You obviously had the July 11 attempted protests, counter-revolutionary protests. You had the attempted follow-up later in 2021, which also again failed. So you have this interesting developments, but in terms of the forces against Cuba in Canada, they've been very, very silent for a long time, and that kind of changed in November actually of this year. I saw it a day, I think it was a couple hours or a day after it happened, that there was this Globe and Mail article where this group called Democratic Spaces and this leader of the group called Michael Lima were talking about filing a request to Global Affairs Canada to implement Magnitsky sanctions, right, against 12 Cuban officials and entities. That's right. So getting the Canadian government to start sanctioning the Cuban government. And so Lima is, he's one of these classic anti-Cuba guys who would fit in very well in Washington, D.C., in that the guy loves to claim that Cuba is repressing peaceful protesters. And as you know, Arnold's done some great investigations with the Canophiles, even where we veered out a little bit of the focus just because it was such an exceptional issue on the nature of those protests. And they very much were not peaceful. You had hospitals getting attacked. Arnold is a person who will go into long depth about that, and I'm sure he'd be happy to come on. But I just give you the short of it. It very much was not a very much a set of peaceful protests. So, of course, this wouldn't be complete without mentioning that backing this actually was there's these two lawyers who are actually senior fellows at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. That is David Matas and Sarah Tyke. So these are very much the run-of-the-mill. Not run-of-the-mill, but very much imperialist types. They're open anti-imperialists. Open imperialists.
Exactly. Yes,
open imperialists.
Exactly.
So
you don't name your institute after the two most famous early settler colonialist prime ministers without. Anyways, no. Continue with what you were saying.
Yeah, for sure. So what I was actually trying to say is that these two lawyers teamed up with the group, of course, Democratic Spaces, to file this motion to Global Affairs Canada. And soon after, you had the Macdonald-Laurier Institute run an event about Cuba and really trying to begin to push this support for the demonization of Cuba. Of course, that event that the MLI hosted on the 15th of November, that actually called for the application of Magnitsky sanctions on Cuban officials, as mentioned in the article in the Globe and Mail. And Michael Lima was a speaker there, and also actually it featured Rosa Maria Paya, who's really one of the main regime changers in the USA, proudly linked to former President Trump, really one of these Cuban-American rabid anti-revolution folks. And of course, the MLI, of course, you have to remember that they take funding from the Latvian government and the Taiwan province government. So you have really a whole bunch of really rabid pro-US folks teaming up for this effort to destabilize and demonize Cuba in Canada. But I found what was interesting as I went further is that Democratic Spaces was a lot more dangerous than I had first realized. I just thought this was a bunch of whack jobs, but it turns out they're a little smarter than that. Actually, in 2021, they had these two petitions, e-petitions. How they work in Canada, typically they tend to be done online for ease of signatures. So it was E3274 and E3573. So the first petition really called for Canada to stand with the U.S. government-funded San Isidro movement and actually asked Canada to invite quote-unquote human rights activists, which are really regime changers, to speak at the Canadian embassy in Cuba about the repression they have faced, among some other demands. And then he got a petition. Of course, the first one was released in March. Second, this one is released in October 19, 2021. So this one actually called for Cuba to release regime change activists, sanction Cuban officials, wanted Cuba to engage in Western-style democratic elections, and actually asked the Canadian government to shift diplomatic relations from the Cuban government to a variety of quote-unquote pro-democracy organizations instead, right? So this came actually just about a week after the Cuban government refused to refused to give one. That would have seen the anti-Cuba protests happen again on November 15th. They still tried to do them, of course, but that miserably failed. So you have that whole situation, right? You got these two really ridiculous petitions. Then, of course, you actually have a jump into January of 2022. So Lima, on behalf of Democratic Spaces, comes to this event co-hosted by the Center for Opening and Development of Latin America, which is really just a wide network of NGOs that the U.S. uses to channel financing to political operators against Cuba and other countries through NED, National Endowment for Democracy, and USAID. The ridiculous thing, right, is this event actually denounced the Cuban internationalist medical brigades. They claimed they denounced alleged quote-unquote slavery in the treatment of Cuban health officials. Yeah, it's wild.
Okay.
And it gets worse, by the way. You have this speech by Senator Leo Housakos, who's really remarkably anti-China and generally rabidly pro-U.S., very extremely anti-communist.
But this is a senator from the U.S. or
Canada,
like
Canada.
Okay, a Cuban Canadian gentleman, or okay, go ahead.
Right. So Housakos, of course, he actually ended up calling for a foreign influence registry about a year ago, which was, let's be real here, always going to be used to try to intimidate really any people that are sympathetic to China or Russia or Iran. And of course, in terms of the type of foreign interference that Housakos was warning about, he would never talk about the influence of the CIA group, let's be real, CIA-funded groups, such as the Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project, which was actually one of the biggest cheerleaders of this foreign influence registry. Just the peak of sheer hypocrisy, right? This idea that
yes, exactly.
Interference in Canadian politics, of course, by the CIA isn't a critical danger. I mean, look at how this influence comes along on the foreign influence registry alone, and I'm sure if people have read the Canfall stuff, they know that it's far more than just support for that sort of registry. Where Michael Lima in Democratic Spaces comes along is actually back in March of 2022. So Lima wrote a speech for Senator Housakos, and they bragged about it, Lima did, on the Democratic Spaces site, where Housakos actually demanded that Cuba be denounced by Canada for quote-unquote systematic human rights violations, and he actually wanted to have Canada shift diplomatic recognition to anti-Cuban government regime change groups under the guise of quote-unquote pro-democracy protests, right? So you have this petition, the second one, back in November of late 2021, and then you have, of course, March 2022, you have this again. This time it's delivered, this message by Housakos. it's kind of remarkable in terms of the speech, that this was openly admitted that Lima wrote this. But these people are, as I've found with the MLI and a lot of other groups, they're very, very brazen until someone actually reports into them into a serious way. And then, just like the MLI did when we reported on them a couple times, they stopped updating their annual reports. And I'm sure there'll be similar shenanigans by Democratic Spaces now that people understand the true nature of them. They're a very hostile group, very rabidly pro-U.S. And so this all, yeah, you want to jump in?
Yes, I wanted to. Just a very quick follow-up question is this unprecedented that Canada that Canada would prop up in an anti-Cuban group? Is that a bit unprecedented? Because from what
I wouldn't say it's fair to say that the Canadian government is propping it up. It's not the Canadian government. You certainly have, I guess, a Canadian senator. You have a Canadian think tank that's funded by, like I said, Latvian government, Taiwan province government as well. These are supporting, but they're not backing it. Wherever this funding for Democratic Space is coming from, it's not clear. And certainly we're not going to speculate when we don't actually have concrete proof of that. Certainly it's important to remember that as much as there is the CIA influence in Canada, that imperialist sympathizers are very much capable of operating without funding from, say, governments, though some of them do. But not all of them are.
Is this a bit unprecedented that an anti-Cuban group like this would be on Canadian soil when, as far as I know, my history of Canada has always been that Canada has always had détente with Cuba, even if behind the scenes the Canadian government sort of spies on Cuba for the Americans. But isn't this isn't this a bit sorry about that, folks, isn't that a bit unprecedented that that there would be a very hostile group like this in Canada towards
I certainly think it is a big change, for sure. I think the Canadian government's rhetoric towards Cuba has been slowly changing since, I think it was February 2021. You had a meeting for the Canadian government with U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, and Canada didn't really say anything about the U.S. blockade against Cuba. Canada always tended to, like I said, and you said, had some elements of friendliness towards Cuba and some elements of détente, But even the slight image of the friendliness is really changing. The July 11th is really the major, I think, driver of that. But there also was movements made before. But I think the 11th protests, of course, the foreign-funded and foreign really sponsored ones, that very much proved as the trigger or the excuse for the Canadian government to implement really major public changes. You have, after this July 11th protest, so July 12th, you have the Canadian Foreign Affairs Ministry blaming both sides, pro-Cuban government people that are coming out and standing up to the protesters, and of course the anti-Cuban government protesters as well. And you had actually anti-Cuban government protesters, right? They ended up doing a lot of looting and really violent rioting. You actually had a attack on hospitals. It was just a really ugly scene of things. Then 3 days later, you got Trudeau talking about supposedly being deeply concerned about quote unquote violent crackdown on protests and he called it the Cuban regime. So before it had been Cuban government, but now it's quote unquote Cuban regime, and it really changed its rhetoric from peaceful relations to very much violent protests, calling them peaceful, and claiming that Canada stood with the people of Cuba. That supposedly they wanted quote unquote democracy, freedom, and respect, when the Cuban people have been very firmly strong and in favor of the Cuban Revolution for more than 60 years that survived despite a brutal U.S. blockade upon it.
Well, it sounds to me as if and Canada does have several Cuba solidarity groups, but it sounds to me as if those Cuba solidarity groups are going to have to step up their efforts because Cuba is already, once more the United Nations, members of the United Nations have slammed the the ongoing sanctions of mass destructions, the American embargo on Cuba, and so Cuba Solidarity folks have to step up their game, because the idea that like Canada would be supporting Magnitsky style sanctions on Cuba is just it's just horrendous, and it's just more collective punishment for a government that Canada should be having no quarrels with. Neither should America be having quarrels for. And that's
also, I believe there's a First Nations in Canada. I believe it was in Manitoba, a First Nation that wanted to have the Cuban Medical Brigade come and help, and of course Freeland, basically the Canadian government, refused to have them come in because supposedly the Canadian healthcare system was capable of dealing with the problem. So very much, there's a Western desire for regime change against Cuba. It really is a major problem, of course, though rhetorically the major shift didn't occur on Cuba till partway through 2021. And the last thing I want to mention in terms of like that July 2021 era, because that month was really important, you had a call with the Cuban Foreign Affairs Ministry by the Canadian government, and Canada had to make sure to issue its quote unquote deep concern about the supposedly violent crackdown on protests in Cuba and repressive measures, and I say in quotes yet again, against supposedly peaceful protesters and other folks. So just really a complete echoing of Biden-Trump talking points on Cuba. So you have this kind of dangerous situation, right, where you have the Democratic Spaces, you have McDonald-Laurier Institute really teaming up, and you have a Canadian senator really on board with this demonization, really pushing. I mean, it's quite a staggering change in terms of rhetorical. Is normally just against the Cuban regime, but now, well, some elements have said Cuban regime for a while, but those elements have been extremely quiet, and now those elements are being very bold, and they have some important political allies. I mean, even the MLI didn't dare to go after Cuba until more recently. You can see there's a sea change, right? There's a weakening of U.S. empire generally, and so now everything that opposes it is going to be attacked with all-out force over these next 5 to 10 years. It's going to be a really kind of a rocky time. But if that wave can be survived, then I mean there'll be a world hopefully but very much U.S. imperialism will be tremendously weakened because it won't be the global superpower anymore. So if that can be survived, it'll be there. But it's going to be a hectic few years because the U.S. empire is on its last legs, and nations like Cuba are now going to come under even more aggressive fire from the U.S., but as well as its allies as well. The pretensions of friendliness are really going to go down the drain, and as they kind of have with Canada and Cuba. Of course, with the Canadian government, they still recognize the Cuban government as a legitimate government. So it's not as if the battle is lost at all. It certainly isn't. But it's just a real danger. And yeah, I think I have trust in the Cuban pro-Cuban government groups to take this seriously. There's one group basically that actually posted my article on their site. The Key Network on Cuba it was. So I think there's a recognition that these groups are dangerous, and I think there is a recognition of the urgency of opposing this kind of rhetoric and attacks immediately, because there's a luxury for Cuba supporters in a different way that it's not as extreme yet. It's not as if Canada is as anti-Cuba as they are anti-China. So there's still a chance to step in and stop this in its tracks. But it's going to be a bit of a war. So I think they have a fighting chance very much.
And that's a perfect segue then to my that's a perfect segue to my next question, which is, can you explain to us what the latest stage of Canada's shameful involvement in the pivot to Asia, or the new Cold War on China, is all about? Now, well, actually, yeah, because your colleague William Deere typed up about this in Canada Attacks China in Indo-Pacific Strategy, while the media attacks Chinese Canadians' democratic rights. Well, what can you say about this? And then also talk to us about an article you contributed to called Canadian Reporter Canadian reporter caught falsely claiming Trudeau was briefed with names of Chinese-funded election candidates. So, yes, talk to us about
Sure thing. So
this Indo-Pacific strategy and this article that you contributed to.
I'll get started on the point of the Indo-Pacific strategy. So you have about $500 million allocated over 5 years, towards the Canadian military-industrial complex. There'll be more engagement in international military exercises. You'll have more warships around South China Sea, Asia generally, and you got around $2.3 billion in spending committed for investments to strengthen Canadian quote infrastructure democracy and to protect Canadian citizens against foreign interference. Of course, this foreign interference narrative that is spewed so hard, I think, partially to deflect against the open CIA influence, but also just because they need the rabid narrative of an evil China, evil Russia, evil Iran, if they want the Canadian population to be subservient and accept their rather brutal foreign policy. It's this Indo-Pacific strategy. It's this mixture of this idea of supposedly just being for the Pacific more broadly, or Indo-Pacific, which obviously a false term. It's actually Asia-Pacific, but it's just constantly mentions China more than 50 times in a 26-page document. And you actually have recently, a few days ago, you had Canada promise to deploy more warships through the Taiwan Strait. Of course, it's called Taiwan Strait. It's really, let's be real here, it's still around China because, of course, Taiwan is a province of China at the end of the day. So you have this basically more warships right off of the coast of China. Yet again, even more foreign interference in the region for supposed protection of democracy and peace or whatever nonsense, garbled nonsense they'll push next to support just a more broad military and a really warmongering stance towards China. You also have another factor, which is the Canadian government actually forcing, it was 3 Chinese state-owned companies to sell their stakes within the Canadian mineral industry, especially critical minerals. And you also have more restrictions on the involvement of Chinese state-owned enterprises in critical mining, in operations in Canada. So you have really on the domestic front, and then you have on the foreign affairs front too, just a really ramping up the hostility towards China. And it's such a dangerous, really damaging policy for Canada. It's yet again another example of Canada being a very much U.S. lapdog. Whatever they want, they very much the U.S. just gets. That's the reality of our government. Very, very servile.
Yes. And what else can you and talk to us a bit about this article that you contributed to? This article that you contributed to, which said Canadian reporter caught falsely claiming Trudeau was briefed with names of Chinese-funded election candidates.
Sure thing. So you have this November 7th article by Global News reporter Sam Cooper, and it claims that Canadian intelligence warned Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, about China covertly funding 2019 election candidates. And it mentions sources at the end, if you notice that. And if you look into the sources, first of all, they're all anonymous, right? There's also a really big claim against the Chinese consulate in Toronto. The allegation is they secretly funded 11 candidates from one of the Liberal or Conservative parties and sent agents to campaign offices to aid them. It really has that claim, hasn't been investigated. It's got no evidence. In terms of CSIS, RCMP, there hasn't been application of to try to get phone calls and electronic communications between China's consulate in Toronto and the candidate campaign offices who supposedly were taking money from China. So the whole tangible evidence of, you have these damaging claims without evidence is really the biggest thing. You have anonymous sources. And then to top it up for good old Sam Cooper is that PM Trudeau on November 20th actually admitted that he was never briefed about these supposed Chinese-funded election candidates. And he admitted he doesn't know their names, if they even exist. Obviously, there's no proof of that in the slightest. And that he only learned of this alleged Chinese interference in Canadian elections from media reports. Right? So the whole premise of Cooper's story is completely false. Canadian intelligence did not warn Trudeau. In fact, Trudeau said openly and publicly that he was told about it by media reports. He doesn't even know the name of these supposedly Chinese-funded candidates.
Okay.
And of course, all the sources that were in there were anonymous. And to give you an idea of, the kind of sourcing that Cooper likes to use in this, there's this book by Sam Cooper. It was called Willful Blindness, and I tortured myself by reading through the whole thing last year. It's a remarkably terrible book. And one of the key things he does is he blames all the problems in terms of like drug use and abuse and such actually in the province of British Columbia on a supposed plot by the Communist Party of China to work with transnational criminal gangs to push drugs in Canada. So you have this whole faction of essentially blame this attempt to push this idea of foreign interference in place of the failure of capitalism, right? It's a blame game. You need this rabid racism to
the Chinese are
really distract people.
The Chinese are hiding under your beds and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's literally what this book is kind of saying.
These kind of people would love it if there was a McCarthyite new Red Scare. They would absolutely go bananas with joy if they had that. They would want that so desperately. So in terms of like this Willful Blindness article book I brought up for a reason is I was looking through this book, and at the end I broke out laughing when I looked at it. There's page 385 of his book. He says that his sources come almost exclusively from the DEA, that's the Drug Enforcement Agency in the U.S., the RCMP, CSIS, and the U.S., quote, the U.S. National Security Community. So that's where his sources almost exclusively come from, in his own words. Basically, and that's supposedly his big book, his big break, the why we should take Sam Cooper seriously, and it's pretty much just the intelligence agency's wet dreams. It's like, oh, hey, we got the glorified stenographer. It's hello, Mr. Cooper. Yes. Would you like to take our press releases and turn into a book? Oh, yes, I would love to do that. Cha-ching! That's basically the Sam Cooper story summarized in a few comical, slight interpretations. I'm obviously not claiming to know internal communications between Sam Cooper and the intelligence agencies and such, but I mean, I could practically see that the way the guy behaves and the way he writes the stories, like I said, it's just a wet dream for the intelligence agencies. The guy's not a reporter. He really isn't. And just the damaging claims this guy makes and the harm he has on the Chinese Canadian community, really spending these smears, just as, you have the multiple hundreds % of hate crimes increasing. You had that, I believe it was like around 700% between 2020 and 2021. And I'm sure that amount is still in the couple hundreds in terms of percentage increase. It's a really dangerous thing. Of course, I want to make clear with this article that Xiaoming Gu also wrote it alongside of me. So this is very much a split thing. This is not just my article, to be dead clear. It was good to work with him. And yeah, this article, like I mentioned, I think it's very thorough. There's a long history of the Canadian intelligence agencies like CSIS despising China. And people can read about that more there in the article. I won't go into it for too long, but yeah, this whole article and generally the Cooper as a reporter, really just a malign influence on Canadian politics and generally, and obviously this at least in this case, for once, it actually there's some consequences for the guy in that the story blew up in his face, but you know damn well he'll never admit that because the mainstream media will never talk about that contradiction.
Yeah,
so he'll be safe.
Quick follow up. What is your article, if it has anything to do with the dust up that happened between the president of China and Justin Trudeau? And is this all part of, because I've been hearing on and off about alleged Chinese interference in the Canadian elections, which of course is all BS. But basically, the Conservative Party of Canada claims that there's been election interference to defeat their party because of their even more hawkish, xenophobic policies. But really, what happened in the end of the day was, look, the Chinese diaspora community, which I don't know how, but basically the Chinese diaspora community in Canada, but also elsewhere, is very much rightly concerned about the pivot to Asia. So many of them are starting to get way more. So many of them are starting to get involved in domestic politics and trying to support and supporting candidates who aren't all gung ho about the pivot to Asia. But these Chinese Canadians are then being accused of being, like, I don't know, agents of the of the Chinese Communist Party back in mainland China. So what's all that about? Does your article answer about? Is your article part of that of this larger context between these baseless accusations, this McCarthyism of Chinese Canadians getting involved in politics, and this and the dust up that happened when the president of China was finger wagging at Justin Trudeau about accusations of Chinese interference and so forth?
Sure. So I'll get to some of the points. We'll try not to keep it incredibly broad. In terms of the behavior you had back in like a few weeks ago, essentially, you had this Indonesia G20 summit, and of course you had a conversation on the sides between Xi and Trudeau, and then of course that got leaked to the press, and Trudeau falsified some of the details, and so Xi called out Trudeau for leaking and falsifying accounts of the conversation. Right? This is a conversation between two heads of state. It's really amateur behavior from the Canadian government to go play a political stunt like this, try to just score political points. So you had that factor. Speaking to it more broadly, of course, the ideas of election interference, and there is this rampant anger against Chinese Canadians who want to prevent, or intimidate Chinese Canadians away from getting involved. You have this like Chinese Council for Western Ontario Elections that got attacked by the Canadian media, claiming that it was it was in China's interest, it was working connected to the Chinese government. And it's just it's rampant xenophobia, right? It's a really an attempt to viciously suppress the ability of Chinese Canadians to participate in the democratic process in the way that doesn't just serve the imperialism of the Canadian state. Because there is a growing, I think, resistance among Chinese Canadians to this demonization. There's a lot of intimidation that makes them afraid to speak out. But I don't think these people are going to. I don't think the communities are going to take it lightly. I don't think they're going to sit down and take it, especially as you see the way the U.S. and Canada, in support of it, is ramping up towards a hot war. Very much, it is the case that these people are opposing that. And so when you have these kind of groups pop up that want to, run candidates or be involved in the democratic process, so quote unquote democratic process in the elections for Canada, you then have to have people in the mainstream linking them to China, the Chinese government, and claiming that they're inferring that they're agents, or directly saying that they're agents of the Chinese government, just really to intimidate them out of doing anything. It's a very dangerous time for people, especially Chinese Canadians. They got a lot to deal with in this atmosphere.
Unbelievable. And now, and how is briefly, if it's possible, how is Canada's involvement in ongoing Cold Wars with North Korea part of this, and part of the pivot to Asia, and possibly and a possible military conflict with China and its partners? And because I know the Canada Files, a Canada Files contributor, did an important but very criminally overlooked investigative piece called "What is Canada's Involvement in Military Exercises Targeting the DPRK Destabilizing Asia?" Is there anything that you can, is there anything that you can talk to us about that?
Sure. I mean, the way I'd put it is, I know there's in 2019, Waldron was talking about being involved in a meeting where Freeland basically was very hawkish towards the DPRK, which was a change from, obviously Canada had, in terms of its embassy and other fronts, had been very hostile towards the DPRK for a while, but you had Freeland ramping it up, being exceptionally hostile, really cheering on the U.S. narrative back in 2018. You have the Canadian government with the military getting involved in Operation Projection. You have Operation Projection, then it becomes Operation Neon, and the Canadian military is involved in that, at the Canadian government's behest. So you have the essentially what it is there's sanctions that weren't there's sanctions approved by the UN, but there wasn't a mission approved by the UN to enforce those sanctions. And so Western governments basically teamed up together to do a joint kind of military mission in trying to intimidate the DPRK, limits its ability to get certain substances, foods, and general tools and such that its citizenry needs. That's really the purpose of it. Was first called Operation Protection and then Operation Neon. Then you also have the Kenyan government being very friendly towards another NED, of course, funded group, which is yet again a CIA front for anyone who just came in a little late. It's called Han Voice, and the Kenyan government obviously didn't provide any funding to the group, but it was supportive to it. Back in the mid 2000s, 2007, you had a Kenyan government minister, I believe it was Jason Kenney actually, speak at their opening event. Okay. Very much working with the conservative government to draft up some potential policy, trying to, portray DPRK as a place where people want to be fleeing, people are terrified. It's such a horrible existence when, there's usual imperialist lies. At the end of the day, DPRK is not a horrible place to be in. When the Trudeau government came in, you had this case where, for a little bit while, the bellicose hot rhetoric towards the DPRK dropped a little bit because Trudeau came in on a less warmongering kind of promise, which of course he would rush to break pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it wasn't until about it was late 2021 when he had the Han Voice actually get its major goal, which was private sponsoring of refugees from the DPRK, i.e. trying to yet again another attempt to portray the DPRK as some sort of crazy pariah state. And of course, this is very convenient because Han Voice talks about the DPRK government as supposedly brutal. It's just a truly terrible organization that ignores the state of affairs in terms of the sanctions on the DPRK. They don't talk about how South Korea came to be and was split apart from the rest of the northern part of Korea by the Western imperialists after Japan was defeated. Of course, you just had the Western troops come in, and you had some Japanese troops used to maintain that occupation. You had the murder of hundreds of thousands of people opposed to the government of Syngman Rhee and generally the U.S. occupation of that country. So you have a whole state of affairs, which is history ignored, right? By the way, in terms of, I don't know if it's can't say it's withholding food aid is what they accused DPRK of. I'm not going to say that, but back in 2010 they did say that there's prison camps, that there's hundreds of thousands of people there that are a quote unquote macabre combination of gulags of the former Soviet Union and Auschwitz. So pushing also while we're at it, of course, pushing the claim that Nazism and socialism are just as bad as each other. Just to give you an idea of that group, and of course, I won't go into it for too long because it's shifting away from our core focus. But I would really recommend people check out that article. It is titled "NED-supported Canadian anti-DPRK lobby group manufactures support for brutal sanctions," and how this set of Canadian actions towards the DPRK figures in is it's yet another tool to try to, if you destabilize the DPRK, then it's a nation close to China. And if you can achieve regime change, you have yet another base to try to launch attacks on China. And let's be real here, there is a desire to balkanize China, just as there's a desire to balkanize Russia, right? In a similar way that the horrible NATO war in Yugoslavia occurred. So it all comes together to that point. The West wants regime change in China as much as it plays nice and pretends to care about democracy and all that stuff. It doesn't. It's all regime change. It's all about power. It's all about preventing China from becoming the number one power in the world just by providing good deals in terms of the Belt and Road Initiative, and generally providing a better economic framework that allows people to break away from the control of the U.S. dollar. China does it. If China rises to the top of the world, it'll be through a very peaceful manner, and they don't operate in a way. They don't interfere in the affairs of other nations, right? They respect sovereignty in a way that the West doesn't ever do that. So even if they become the top power in the world over the U.S. economically, which certainly they are set to do that in the next couple years at latest, they're not going to do the same things as the U.S. It's completely false to equate the U.S. and China
Very quick follow up. Will we be seeing more of the will we be seeing more of these military exercises on North Korea, and will we be hearing more alleged horror stories or fake news horror stories of North Korea as part of the pivot to Asia, especially with the current South Korean right wing leadership, which is very dismantled détente that was established by the previous South Korean presidents.
Sure. And I obviously can't speak to that for sure. I mean, certainly in terms of the missions, I'm sure Operation Neon will continue to go ahead, and it'll continue to be just as much in a front and attack on the DPRK as it has ever been. Like I said, it's impossible to predict that at the end of the day because there won't be the U.S. can't take on 10,000 different fronts, though I'm quite confident they'll continue to harass and try to destroy the DPRK. China, I think, is the biggest priority at the end of the day for the United States. So as much as there's that concern there, they'll get targeted in the way that they usually do, but I don't see the way they're targeted being changed a dramatic amount. They'll just continue to try to go after them even further. Of course, something could happen and the policy could change, right? But I'm not going to pretend to have some sort of crystal ball and know that for sure. So it's not a question I can really give you a definitive answer to.
Okay, we're back. So Aidan, just in closing, my second to last question I wanted to ask you is there was a recent article also in yours truly, the Canada Files, by your new contributor Kit Clarenberg. The title of this is "Canadian Teacher Loses Millions After Collapse of Corrupt Ukrainian government-tied U.S. crypto exchange." Talk to us about this, because I believe this this failed company has been in the news a lot, FTX. But yes, talk to us a little bit about.
Sure thing. So it's the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, right? That's the plan that lost the money, 95 million USD. It had to write that investment off with FTX because it completely collapsed in the first few weeks of November. So really, the FTX highly recommended, great praise in the media. Democratic politicians were cheering it on, and you had these ties to, of course, it collapsed, right? But what's of interest here as well, just along the facts that basically the teachers lost this money, is in addition to the fact that there's a very much Ukraine element in that it has some ties to the Ukrainian government. You have there's a joint venture, right? It was between FTX and Ukraine's digital transformation ministry, first publicized in mid-March.
Wait, but once again, the FTX is a teachers association.
No, it's cryptocurrency. It's a cryptocurrency.
Okay.
Basically platform, right? That's what it is. Cryptocurrency exchange, to be specific.
Okay. Got confused with something else. Okay, but go on, explain.
All right, for sure. So, all right, holy hell, give me a second here. You're gonna have to do some cuts. I think your confusion there, it's okay, but it caused me to lose focus a little bit. Okay, and a 1, 2, 3, and a 1, 2, 3. Okay, right. So getting back to this, with the venture between FTX and Ukraine's digital transformation ministry, it, in its own words, pledged to turn Bitcoin into bullets, bandages, and other war material. So the idea is that FTX would receive funds in various crypto coins. It would convert these sums to fiat currency, and then that would be used by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. You also have FTX's involvement in Aid for Ukraine, which is an online portal which solicited cryptocurrency donations for Ukraine's war effort. That basically was supposedly updated to claim about 60 million have been raised so far on April 6th. This is by April 6th of 2022. But then it was a little strange because the portal got spun off to another identical website. Early November, FTX collapsed, and that amount never got updated, which is very strange. If they supposedly raised within a month and a bit, more than 60 million, and then somehow they never raised another cent. It was a whole very strange series of events. Yeah, and then you had this attempt, of course, once FTX collapsed, you went about and you saw these Ukrainian government officials and anyone connected to Ukraine try to claim that FTX really had no involvement in it. The whole numbers in terms of aid for Ukraine, the agreement between FTX and that Ministry of Digital Transformation, everything's very, very unclear. Numbers are questionable. And in terms of connections, you also had the Kiev School of Economics, where it had a charitable foundation based in Washington, D.C., which had actually acquired FTX wallets. The organization also was going to use that to convert cryptocurrency donations into humanitarian aid. Also, yet again, there, numbers are questionable. Target was never actually disclosed. So, yeah, Ukraine spent a lot of money. Even between February 24th to March 9th, they apparently burned through $100 million in crypto donations. But the whole money spending, like I said, very, very questionable. And you had this whole mess of a system. You also had FTX, of course, being a mess as well. Apparently, there's this actually backdoor. It was crazy. When I read this kit, it was wild to see it myself, but it was very good, well researched by Kit. There's this backdoor that could only be accessed by Sam Bankman-Fried, who is the real head of FTX. They could actually fund the customer cash out of the company's exchange without anybody else knowing. So you have potentially billions, right, in FTX that have gone missing. It's rather remarkable, it's a rather remarkable case. You have Aid for Ukraine, you have that peculiar initiative between FTX and that Ministry of Digital Transformation. You have the Kiev School of Economics opening a crypto wallet so that they can get crypto donations and turn those into money for aid. You have all these Ukrainian government connections that aren't very clear, and obviously they're not funded by Ukraine, to be clear, but no, it was important for, I think, people to know how suspect this FTX company was, and of course, for people to understand how friendly and closely tied it was with a really corrupt Ukrainian government. That everyone loved to admit Ukraine was corrupt until 2022, and then once Russia's SMO began, everyone all of a sudden presented it as the valorous hero of democracy. Just this complete narrative change, whether it's the ignorance of the extent of Nazi influence, neo-Nazi influence in Ukraine, the influence of Azov Battalion and other fronts. Basically, the second Ukraine basically had Russia began its SMO and come on in, it was just this complete delusion state of affairs. So it was just important to bring up, as a story, because Ontario teachers lost more than 100 million Canadian, because that's 95 million USD, which is very much, USD is a higher currency value than the Canadian dollar. It's just, you really do have these teachers being one of thousands of FTX victims. You have so many powerful actors, have a lot of interest in just covering this up. So you have some ideas of what's going on in Ukraine with FTX, but there's going to be efforts to cover it up, and so we may never know the full extent of it, and Ontarians and Canadians generally may never get to know how this group, its fall and how it did really fall. So we'll have to see what more information comes along, but it was a really crucial article, and it's one of the ways that Canadian people are losing from this war on Ukraine, whether it's billions in aid to Ukraine in terms of weapons, billions to aid in terms of humanitarian elements and humanitarian aid. Canadian people are losing billions of dollars that could be put into social programs that are being used to support a lot of very much a strongly neo-Nazi influenced government. And Canadian people, like I said, we pay the price at the end of the day. Our elites are not going to be the ones that pay the price. They're on their comfy, nearly $200,000 a year salary. These MPs that are basically best buddies with Ukraine and just do whatever Washington wants them to do on the front of Ukraine. So it very much comes down to a Canadian elite that doesn't serve the people, and we pay the price for it.
Yes, and very quick follow up. I have to ask this. I find it strange that the Canadian government would get involved in cryptocurrency, given how little we actually really know about cryptocurrency, given that like when people do explain to you or when I read about cryptocurrency, it sounds like it sounds like a scam, or it sounds way too complicated that I would not put my money on it. I would not invest in it. And Trudeau and the Canadian media have also been mocking the new leader of the Conservative Party, Pierre Poilievre, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing his name, because he was kind of like propping up like cryptocurrency and that folks should get involved in cryptocurrency. So why then? So why would they get involved in this sort of house of cards? Curious your thoughts on that.
I mean, obviously, I know in terms of like online currencies, I think China hasn't unveiled one recently, but I'm not going to pretend to be the expert, so I'm not going to really speak on that. I would recommend people search up about it. But in terms of the whole state of affairs, by the way, one clarification, when I was talking about aid for Ukraine and the venture between FTX and that digital transformation ministry, I was meaning to say that those are the same things, right? Basically, that aid for Ukraine is the joint venture between FTX and Ukraine's digital transformation ministry, right? But in terms of cryptocurrency generally, it could have some uses, it could have some value. I mean, certainly I wouldn't invest my money into it, but with states, progressive states and some socialist states using it to get around U.S. sanctions, it could have some strong value there. And I mean, crypto more broadly, I mean, we'll see, but I mean, I'm very much not someone who's ever going to throw my own money into crypto.
Well, hopefully, Dr. Jared Ball, who's been on the program twice before, he's very anti-cryptocurrency, so I'm hoping to have him on the program to talk more about that. And folks should also check out Breakthrough News. He also did an episode all about warning folks on cryptocurrency. Aidan, before we close the program, make some last. I want to end with the questionnaire done by Inside the Actors Field. But first, make some pitches on folks donating to the Canada Files End of the Year drive, please. The floor is yours.
For sure. So, as I explained at the start, Canada Files is really the only news outlet in the country dedicated to coverage of Canadian foreign policy. Proudly socialist, we're proudly anti-imperialist. We have 3 years of tradition in terms of breaking investigative stories, of doing really critical news analysis. We're getting back into the interviews with the speaker series. Of course, the first one of which was interviewing Eva Bartlett, who has tended to report from the Donbass region and lives in Russia, a brave journalist who's quite good on foreign policy. And so we've done those elements, and in terms of the work we do, we've managed to, we've really reached millions of social media engagements. We built I think I'm pretty proud to say the campus has a passionate, really dedicated audience. We're trying to expand things further. We're trying to get the financial support we need to survive and grow really over time. Our goal, by the way, is 4,000 Canadian. Currently, we're just a bit over $1,000, so we've gone up from around $700 a month in support to 1041 Canadian per month. So we've already gotten some very good growth. We have some great articles coming along next week. People can check the launch video for the Canada Files fundraising campaign if they want more details there. But I'd really urge people, if you enjoy the work the Canada Files done that we've discussed throughout, if you go to the Canada Files site, there'll be a donate button in the top left corner. Click on that donate button, go to the donor box page, and set up a monthly donation if you want to support our work. We do really critical journalism at the end of the day, right? We need support to expand it, to do more investigations, more analysis, and continue to do push forward with our great new speaker series.
And can you remind people when's this event that you're co-hosting with Covert Magazine?
Sure thing. December 13th, 7 p.m. on CIA influence in terms of how it influences public opinion in Canada and how it corrupts Canadian foreign policy. That'll be, as I mentioned, 13th, 7 p.m. EST. It'll feature myself, Eva Bartlett, Arnold August, and Jeremy Kuzmarov as the speakers.
Alrighty, and now we usually end this program when we do get the chance. We usually end this program with both old and new guests by closing it with the questionnaire done by Marcel Proust, later the French broadcaster Bernard Pivot, and later done by my hero, the late great James Lipton of Inside the Actors Studio. I cannot wait, Aidan. It's your turn to do this, so let's go. So let's go and do this. Aidan, what is your favorite word?
My favorite word.
Yeah.
Now that is a good question. Maybe scrumptious.
Scrumptious. Okay. What's your least favorite word then? War? Imperialism?
I would say maybe, let's say, it's a tie between CSIS and the CIA.
What turns you on creatively?
Imperialism, of course, I hate it broadly, but, it's a word that has a lot of purposes and breadth, and you can't just banish it from the state of affairs, and the world wouldn't be a better place. Of course, Lenin's explanation of imperialism has stood strong to this day, so certainly I can't hate the word. I just tend to hate how it's used by many.
What exactly? Now, what turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
I like to listen to some music on Spotify. It's a mix of rock, some occasionally some pop. I've listened to some Youngblood, some Kendrick Lamar, a mix of such things. I do enjoy some good rappers. And it's a wide variety of stuff, but I can clearly mention those.
Oh, nice. Then what turns you off then?
What turns me off? I mean, I'm certainly not like a big opera fan, I would say. Other than that, I don't have particularly the kind of music I'm not a big fan of. Like I had a country phase back when I was like late, just about to turn 18 in the last few weeks. Before then, I had a country phase for like 2 weeks, which was one of the funnier things. I remember still to this day. But yeah, that would probably be it. I mean, other than opera, there isn't a particular kind of music where I'm like, what the hell is this? So,
okay, what's your favorite curse word then?
Curse word. Yuri, I don't want to get your interview demonetized. If you mention monetization one day, Yuri, I'm not trying to get you. I'm not trying to get
as long as we're not talking about COVID, nothing's gonna get demonetized or censored. So true. Go ahead. What's your favorite curse word? And it can be.
As much fun as the question is, Yuri, I don't think I really have a favorite swear word.
Aidan Jonah does not have a favorite curse word. Okay, all right. We'll leave that blank. Then, well, you already mentioned that music, turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally, and bad music like opera, turns you on. But then, what sound noise do you love? Followed by what sound noise do you hate?
Out of these, I mean, music is fun to hear. I guess maybe like scraping nails against a chalkboard would be annoying. Okay. I mean, I could live with it, but it would certainly be a bit annoying. Other than that, I don't think there's too much anyways. You live in Toronto, and certainly you get a lot of construction and a lot of noises around you. You kind of get used to it in a different way than people might be when they're more so outside of the city.
Then, so the sour noise that you dislike is some of those like city noises that comes with living in a place like Toronto. Then
I mean, those aren't the end of the world. You come to expect those. I think it's more just like I said, scraping nails on a chalkboard is a little bit brutal for anyone. I don't exactly think that's a hot take on my part.
Then, what profession, if you weren't doing the wonderful journalism that you do, which is also media criticism, which is also NGO criticism, so what profession, if you weren't doing the great journalism that you're doing, would you like to attempt?
I mean, most likely for me, I would end up just going into political organizing. Would be where I go, because obviously before I founded the Camp Files, I was more of an activist than anything, and I kind of shifted more and more into a fully onto a journalist, because I had Camp Files even had activist elements for very much time, and I think in this year we've made the decision to shift really firmly towards the front of a news organization, because we have to pick our battles. We got to function as constantly bringing in original news, original scoops around ATIPs, around documents. There's a bunch of things working with. The thing I forgot to mention with the Indo-Pacific story is the Canadian government actually, this was back in late summer / early fall of this year. I had filed some ATIPs into the development of the Indo-Pacific strategy to try to get some documents there, and they delayed it by 180 for one file and then 270 days for another one. You also had CSIS when there's the Huawei decision this year announced to ban Huawei from operating on 5G. CSIS delayed it by about 365 days at the beginning of the year when the decision was made a couple months later. So, when we're doing this fighting, when we're doing this journalism, people might not realize that sometimes when we're doing this investigations, like if we don't have an investigation for a few days or a week even or so, it's not because we're just like dilly-dallying or just wasting our time around. We're fighting off government agencies a lot in terms of how they act and how they try to delay a lot of things. So certainly there's at least one article this week that'll be coming out despite constant delays on the front of ATIPs and some of these elements, which is access to information processing requests for your American folks, because that's like the FOI equivalent for Canada. So we do a lot of that. And
so if you weren't doing full-time journalism, you would definitely be doing just like full-time activism.
I would try to get into some of the politics elements. Certainly, right now I'm not working full-time with the Canada Files. That is a goal over time for sure. As more support comes along, that becomes closer and closer to being something that I can do very much. But for now, certainly I'm not working full-time. So we have to see. I'm not sure if I will end up doing that in the meantime. I think I'll find other ways to scrape on by, but certainly I will be scraping on by, because the kind of jobs I can make that can make a couple $1,000s and have a comfortable existence would also involve me not doing as much with the Canada Files, which is absolutely not of interest to me. So, very much I think the hope is myself, others are taking big risks to do the kind of stuff we do, and the hope is that some people will see the coverage we do, the unique value we provide, and what we bring to the table in comparison to anyone else, and they'll support our work on a monthly basis. So.
And then the final question then, Aidan, is, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates, or whatever is the vision of the afterlife that you believe in, or even if you don't believe in, but you're proven wrong, what would you like to hear the big person say?
The fun of the question. As fun of that question is, I like to tend to stick out of religion. Generally, I'm not religious myself, but there's religious comrades that do a lot of great work. Religion has sometimes influenced, like liberation movement, liberation theology has had a big place. So I'm not religious myself personally, but as someone who's not particularly religious, I don't want to say or really even think about what I would say to a religious figure, religious deity, because that might be insulting to religious folks. So I'd rather just be respectful and focus on my element.
I doubt you would be disrespectful. I think it's just
look, you're. I'll stick out of that. Okay, I'm down for some other questions, maybe just non-religion side of things.
I can't believe this. One of the most fearless editors in the world is afraid does not want to answer that question. But
I'm not afraid. Just there's no need to pick certain battles sometimes, right? In life, you don't need to be the master of all. You need to be you need to try to be a specialist in some things. You don't need to be a specialist in everything, or else you tend to get nowhere.
I'll agree to disagree, but anywho, folks, we were joined on this edition, our All Things Canada edition, with Aidan Jonah, the editor-in-chief of the Canada Files. Folks, I'll make sure to, subscribe to the Canada Files. Make sure to check out the Canada Files any chance you get. And if you can, please do donate generously to their end of the year drive. Check out this event that's going to be happening December 13th with Covert Magazine, Eva Bartlett, Arnold August, Jeremy
Kuzmarov.
Jeremy Kuzmarov. It's going to be great. And Aidan, I'm going to wish you the best of luck on this end of the year drive, and I myself will try to. I will also try to make a video pitch to make sure that folks check out the Canada Files and donate. Until then, Aidan, thank you so much for coming back on. Tell your team, if any of them ever want an interview, they are more than welcome to come, and keep up the great work you're doing. Okay.
Thank you for sure, and I'll let them know. Thanks for the interview, Youri.
No problem. My pleasure.